The Egyptian pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but the maintainer of Mahat, the principle of harmony that held the world together. When Mahat faltered, famine, chaos, and plague followed. The king's failure was not political, but cosmological. He was responsible for keeping the resonance between heaven and earth intact. In that sense, the pharaoh was a living echo of Adam, a caretaker of the garden that remained. But as centuries passed, form devoured meaning. The rites continued, but the resonance faded. The priest spoke the words, but the words no longer sang. Power replaced reverence, and hierarchy smothered the sacred. What had once been remembrance became performance. The gods withdrew again, leaving temples filled with echoing prayers. The story repeated itself from Nile to Euphrates to Rome to modernity. Humanity reaching for heaven and losing touch with the soil. Even the religions born to heal that separation inherited its shadow. The Abrahamic faiths, descendants of the Edenic myth, promised a paradise restored, yet each placed it in a distant future or another world. Heaven became a reward for obedience, rather than a state of being. Salvation replaced remembrance, and so the garden receded once more, displaced from the living earth into the unreachable beyond. But the mystics of every faith refused to forget. The Sufis sang of the beloved whose beauty burns through the veil. The Kabbalists mapped the Sephiroth, tracing the descent of divine light into matter. The Christian hermit spoke of theosis, union with God through stillness. All describe the same journey inward from exile to reunion. To them, paradise was not postponed, it was rediscovered. The kingdom of God is within you, said the Nazarene teacher. Few listened, but those who did recognize the old pattern. The gate is inside and its flame still waits. Even outside religion, echoes of the garden pulse through philosophy and art. Plato's realm of forms is another Eden, the invisible perfection of which our world is a shadow. In the Renaissance, painters filled their canvases with radiant landscapes that seemed to remember a lost light. In romantic poetry, nature once again became sacred. Wordsworth's intimations of immortality and Blake's infinite in everything are the same longing in a new tongue. The modern mind may call it nostalgia, but the soul knows it as homesickness. What if all of culture, our art, science, and searching is simply the outward expression of the inward yearning to return? The libraries, observatories, and laboratories of the world might then be the new temples of a species trying to remember its origin. We explore the atom and the cosmos, not because we are curious, but because something in us recognizes them as reflections of the same garden. The microscope and the telescope are the twin eyes of a fallen being trying to see home again. Yet each attempt brings us closer to the same realization. Eden cannot be found by force or intellect. Every discovery that expands our knowledge also exposes the mystery's depth. The universe grows larger, the self more uncertain. It is as though the cosmos conspires to keep us searching, not to torment us, but to teach us humility. For the gate does not open through conquest, but surrender. In the 20th century, as wars scarred the planet, a few visionaries began to sense that the next stage of human evolution would not be technological, but spiritual. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called it the Omega Point, the culmination of consciousness when humanity reawakens to its divine source. Carl Jung saw it in dreams and symbols, the collective unconscious pushing toward integration, the reconciliation of opposites. Even the physicist David Bow spoke of the implicate order, a hidden unity beneath apparent fragmentation. Each in their own language echoed the same truth, that Eden is not behind us but ahead. Its memory a compass guiding us home. Still, the path is neither linear nor gentle. Every return begins with kernel. Before the dawn of a new age, the old world must fall apart like a cocoon that can no longer contain what grows inside. The environmental, social, and spiritual crises of our time may be the symptoms of this transformation. The earth is not merely suffering, it is speaking, urging us to remember the covenant we once broke. The storms, the droughts, the fires, they are not punishments, but messages. The balance is off. The garden is still here, but we have forgotten how to tend it. In the myths of the Hopi people, there is a prophecy. When the world forgets the sacredness of life, it will face purification. But after the purification, a new world will emerge, one where the people of the heart will walk again in balance. The Mayans said the same of the end of the long count calendar, not apocalypse, but renewal. Even the book of Revelation, beneath its imagery of fire and judgment, ends not with destruction, but with a restored Eden, a city with rivers flowing through it. trees of life on either side, and the divine dwelling among humanity once more. The story completes its circle. Perhaps then the purpose of exile was never punishment, but preparation to lose the garden was to learn the weight of choice, to experience separation so that reunion might be conscious. Innocence was never the goal. Awareness was, and awareness at its highest becomes compassion. The ability to see creation not as other, but as self. When that realization takes root, the gate opens effortlessly. We were never meant to stay in Eden forever. The fall was part of the design, the descent necessary for return. Like a seed buried in darkness, humanity had to forget to remember, to fall, to rise. Paradise was not lost. It was planted. And now, after millennia of wandering, the seed begins to stir. We feel it in the unease of modern life, in the hunger for meaning that no screen can satisfy, in the growing whisper that the old world is ending so that the true one can begin. The story of Eden was never about where we came from, but who we are becoming. The garden awaits not behind us in myth, but ahead in consciousness. When we understand that the divine never departed, only disguised itself in matter, then every leaf, every breath, every star becomes part of the same luminous home. And in that moment of recognition, exile ends. If exile ends in recognition, then perhaps all of history has been a slow remembering, an evolution not of the body, but of awareness. Somewhere deep in the human spirit, an old memory stirs, older than civilization, older than speech. It murmurs that the separation between heaven and earth was never absolute, that the gates of paradise were never truly locked. The veil that divides is not in the sky or in time. It is woven through perception. And the moment that veil thins, even for an instant, the garden breathes again through us. Many who have touched that state describe it the same way. A sudden clarity, a stillness in which the ordinary becomes radiant. The mystic Meister Eckhart called it the birth of God in the soul. The Sufi poet Rumi said, "We are not a drop in the ocean, we are the entire ocean in a drop." Zen masters call it Kencho, seeing one's true nature. In each tradition, the experience is the same. The world does not change, but the eyes that see it do. The exile ends not by traveling, but by awakening. And yet, this awakening comes rarely and never easily. The modern mind has built its own labyrinth of noise and motion, of screens and systems that promise connection while deepening the void. We measure, analyze, record, and replicate, but we do not see. We move faster than the rhythm of life. And in that acceleration, the subtle frequencies of paradise slip beneath perception. The ancient resonance still hums, but we no longer move at its pace. Perhaps that is why silence feels sacred, even to those who do not believe in gods. Silence is the rhythm of Eden. In silence, thought slows to the tempo of breath, and breath to the pulse of the earth. Within that stillness, a different kind of hearing emerges. The kind that perceives meaning in wind, intelligence in trees, consciousness in stone. The world that seemed inert begins to glow again. We glimpse what our ancestors knew, that the divine never left. It was we who ceased to listen. To remember Eden, then, is to remember relationship, the living bond between all forms of being. In the old text, Adam's first task was to name the creatures of the garden, not to command them. Naming was communion. To name was to recognize the divine spark in another. But after the fall, naming became ownership. Language, once a bridge, became a boundary. The earth turned from kin to property, the animal from companion to resource. And yet deep in the psyche, the memory of kinship remains. It is why people weep before mountains, why they whisper to animals, why even in a world of machines, a sunset can still undo us. Something ancient responds, a recognition that we are not visitors here. We are the garden remembering itself. In myth, every fall is followed by a messenger, a being who carries fragments of the lost light back into the world. In Sumer, it was Enki who saved life from the flood. In Egypt, Thoth who preserved wisdom through writing. In Greece, Prometheus who brought fire to humankind. In Christianity, the Christ who reopened the path to union. The messengers change, but the message does not. The divine is not absent. It hides in you. The path home is not ascent, but remembrance. But remembrance is dangerous. It unravels the structures that depend on forgetfulness. Throughout history, those who spoke of the inner garden were persecuted. The Gnostics burned, the Cathars destroyed, the mystics exiled. Their heresy was simple. They claimed that the divine did not need intermediaries, that the gate could open from within. Such truth threatens every throne built on distance. And so the gatekeepers of the outer world closed in. The whispers went underground, surviving in symbols, in poetry, in the quiet hearts of those who still remembered the sound of the first dawn. In the Renaissance, that whisper grew louder. Artists painted light, not as illumination, but as revelation. Alchemists sought transformation, not of lead into gold, but of matter into spirit. As above, so below became more than a motto. It was a memory. Even in the Enlightenment, as science dethroned myth, a few still heard the echo. Newton, the father of modern physics, filled his notebooks with mystic diagrams of the Temple of Solomon. Kepler described planetary motion as celestial music. They did not reject Eden. They tried to rediscover its order through reason. The tragedy is that their successors kept the equations but lost the ore. Yet all persists. It cannot be eradicated, only ignored. It returns in the moments that silence the intellect. The first cry of a newborn, the stillness before a storm, the endless night of the desert where stars spill like memory. In such moments, the boundaries dissolve and something vast stirs behind the veil. For an instant, we are home again. And though the moment passes, the taste remains haunting and sweet. Modern psychology calls this numinous experience. Neuroscience maps it to the brain's default mode network. No definition can touch its essence. The sacred is not a phenomenon to be explained. It is the origin remembering itself through us. When we feel awe, it is the garden breathing through the human form, whispering that the fall was never final. Perhaps that is the secret hidden in every mystical teaching. The divine hides not beyond reach, but behind recognition. When the eyes soften, when the heart opens, paradise reveals itself. In the simplest places, in the reflection of sunlight on water, in the laughter of a stranger, in the pulse between two breaths, the gate opens quietly without trumpet or flame. But recognition brings responsibility. To remember the garden is to remember that we are its caretakers, not its rulers, not its owners, but its consciousness. The earth is not a stage for our dominion. It is the body of the divine expressing itself through life. When we harm it, we wound the sacred. When we heal it, we heal ourselves. Every act of care, every gesture of reverence is a step toward restoration. The mystic tradition has always said that the world awakens as we do, that matter mirrors mind. If enough hearts remember, if enough eyes see, the collective field shifts. The garden does not return as miracle or apocalypse, but as renewal, a slow greening of consciousness. The rivers clear, the soil breathes, the air softens. Eden reappears not from the sky, but from within humanity's restored sight, and so the journey turns inward once more. The maps of paradise were never meant to lead us to a place. They were meant to lead us to perception. The rivers, the trees, the flaming sword, each a symbol of forces within. The four rivers are the flows of awareness. The tree of life is the spine of awakening. The cherubim are the guardians of the heart. The myth, when read inwardly, becomes anatomy, a blueprint for returning. When humanity begins to live by that understanding, history will cease to be exile and become pilgrimage. The world will no longer be a battleground between matter and spirit, but a dialogue between them. Creation will remember its own face through our eyes. And perhaps when that happens, the story of Eden will finally end. Not because the garden is found, but because the distinction between garden and world will disappear. There is a strange tenderness in the idea that paradise was never lost, only veiled. It means the exile was never punishment, only distance, a necessary dimming so that we might learn to see the light again when it returns. But what if the veil is thinning now? What if all the fractures of our age, environmental, spiritual, emotional, are not endings, but contractions before birth? Every apocalypse, after all, is also a revelation. Perhaps the world trembles not because it is dying, but because it is remembering. Ancient prophecies spoke often of such a time. The Hopi elders called it the Great Purification, when the world would be cleansed by fire and renewal. The mayor described it as the end of one cycle and the beginning of another, a turning of the great cosmic wheel. Even the early Gnostics, whose gospels were buried to preserve their truth, wrote of a final unveiling, the restoration of the pleioma, the fullness that existed before the fall. In every culture, the story repeats. The long night of forgetting ends in the dawn of remembrance. The earth itself becomes the instrument of that awakening. Look closely at our present moment, and the signs multiply. The planet warms, the poles shift, storms rise from the sea, and forests burn. It feels like punishment, but perhaps it is purgation. The same elements that once sustained life now move to rebalance it. The earth is retuning its frequency, shaking away what no longer resonates. To those still caught in the old vibration, it feels like collapse. But to those who can listen beneath the noise, there is a subtler sound emerging, the hum of coherence, faint but growing stronger. It is not only the planet that trembles. Humanity too stands on a precipice of remembering. The old structures, political, religious, economic, crumble under the weight of their own forgetting. We have built towers of information and called them knowledge. machines of progress, and called them salvation. Yet none can quiet the unease that hums beneath the surface. The more we accumulate, the less we feel whole. Something within us knows that the path forward is not outward expansion, but inward return. Across the world, a quiet shift is taking place. Millions are turning toward meditation, toward stillness, toward nature. Scientists speak of global coherence, a measurable field of synchronized human emotion. Mystics speak of the collective heart awakening. Psychologists name it integrative consciousness, but the language is secondary. What matters is the impulse. The same longing that once built temples and lit candles now moves through human hearts without hierarchy or creed. The yearning for Eden has gone wireless, no longer bound to stone or scripture. It is said that before the dawn of every new age, the veil grows thinnest, dreams become vivid, synchronicities multiply, time itself seems to ripple. The boundaries between matter and spirit blur, and the world begins to shimmer again. The ancients would have called this the return of the sacred feminine, the reawakening of the earth's consciousness through the human soul. In myth, she was Eve, Sophia, Isis, Shakti, the one who fell and the one who rises. The fall, viewed through her eyes, was not transgression, but descent. Spirit diving into matter to awaken it from within. Her return now signals the restoration of that balance, the reunion of what was divided. Yet the process is not gentle. The birth of new awareness often feels like the death of the old. Systems built on control resist dissolution. Minds trained in separation resist unity. The guardians of the outer gate, fear, doubt, ego rise to test the seeker. Every myth of resurrection carries this truth. Before paradise is regained, it must be faced in shadow. Inanna must hang in the underworld. Christ must descend into the tomb. The seed must crack to grow. The earth itself mirrors this descent, the dark soil that births the green. Perhaps this is why the garden was hidden in the first place. To find it too easily would mean never understanding its value. Only through loss does love become conscious. Only through exile does home become holy. The myth of Eden seen from this vantage is not the story of sin. It is the story of awakening through forgetting. Humanity's long wandering was never aimless. It was a spiral journey inward, gathering the wisdom of every fall, every rise, every grief, every wonder until we could finally hold paradise with eyes that know what it means to lose. Even the scriptures hint at this evolution. In Genesis, Adam and Eve are cast out and cherubim guard the way to the tree of life. But in Revelation, the same tree returns, its leaves healing the nations, its river flowing through the new earth. The sword of flame is gone. The guardians have stepped aside. The story ends where it began, but with one difference. The garden is no longer a gift from outside. It grows from within the human heart. Maybe that is the ultimate paradox. Paradise cannot be restored to the world until it is restored in us. The earth mirrors our consciousness. The outer environment reflects the inner. When humanity sees itself as separate, nature sickens. When humanity remembers unity, nature heals. The climate crisis, the social unraveling, the loneliness of the digital age, all may be symptoms of the same forgetting. And the cure is not technological, but spiritual, a reawakening of relationship. If there is a prophecy worth believing, it is this one, that the earth and humanity are not enemies in evolution, but partners in remembrance. The planet itself is ascending through us. We are the instruments of its memory, the voices through which it sings itself back to harmony. Every act of kindness, every gesture of reverence, every silence shared in wonder strengthens that resonance. When enough hearts align, the frequency will shift and the garden will unfold not as miracle, but as inevitability. The mystics said it best. The fall was never a fall downward, but outward. Consciousness expanding into time and space, scattering the seeds of the divine across galaxies. We are those seeds scattered through aeons, germinating through struggle. The return is not retreat, but bloom. And perhaps when the final petal opens, when the light within humanity and the light within the world become one, the story of Eden will cease to be a myth and become a memory restored. The river will flow clear again. Not because the gods descend, but because we ascend to meet them. The garden will not return as it was, but as something greater, paradise made conscious, creation aware of itself. Maybe that is what the ancients meant when they whispered of the world to come. Not a new planet, not an afterlife, but a new way of seeing this one. The end of exile is not an escape, but an awakening. The moment we remember that we were never cast out, only sent forth to bring the garden with us. The closer humanity comes to remembering, the more the illusion of separation trembles. We sense it in our restlessness. our hunger for meaning that no progress can satisfy. Something deep in the collective psyche feels the veil thinning, even if the mind cannot name it. Anxiety, division, and despair rise not because the world is ending, but because an older pattern is dissolving. The story we have lived for millennia, the story of exile, dominion, and distance, is beginning to break apart. What follows is not a fall into darkness, but the collapse of a dream that has run its course. The mystics always said this moment would come. When the world forgets itself completely, wrote the Sufi Ibn Arabi, the remembrance will begin. In forgetting, the divine experiences itself through limitation. In remembering, it awakens through love. Humanity's turmoil then is not an accident. It is the friction of awakening. The noise of civilization is the static before clarity, the struggle of the crisis before the wing. The garden never stopped existing. It only waits for the dreamer to wake. But waking is not peaceful at first. To awaken from a long sleep of separation is to see the cost of forgetting. Forests razed, oceans poisoned, species vanished. The garden's body bears our scars. Each wound is a mirror showing us what it means to live without memory. And yet, even in destruction, the pattern of healing hides. Burned forests sprout new green, coral reefs, when protected, regenerate. The Earth's design is forgiveness itself. It keeps returning to balance no matter how many times we break it. Perhaps that is the truest reflection of Eden. Not eternal perfection, but eternal renewal. What if paradise was never meant to be a static piece, but a living rhythm, creation and decay, forgetting and remembering, fall and return? The ancients hinted at this in their cycles of time, the four yugas, the world ages, the turning of the wheel. In the beginning, light and matter were one. Then slowly the two drifted apart like breath leaving the body. Now, after eons of exile, the inhale begins again. The same breath that created the cosmos moves through us, drawing spirit back into form. We are the lungs of the divine, expanding and contracting through eternity. Modern physics, in its own language, whispers a similar truth. The universe is not a machine, but a field of relationships, vibrations entangled beyond measure. Every atom of your body was forged in the heart of a star. Every breath you take carries molecules once inhaled by ancient forests, once part of oceans, once part of someone's dream. The boundaries between you and the world are linguistic, not real. Matter itself is memory woven through time. When we understand this, Eden stops being elsewhere. It becomes the living network of being itself. The greatest heresy of modernity was not disbelief in God, but disbelief in relationship. We convinced ourselves that consciousness is confined to the skull, that life is an accident, that the universe is indifferent. In that story, paradise is impossible. But when the veil thins, when the smallest particle reveals itself as vibration, as intelligence, the entire story trembles. The sacred returns, not as dogma, but as direct perception. The garden blooms again in physics and poetry alike. It may be no coincidence that humanity's technological web now mirrors the invisible web of life. The internet, for all its chaos, is a crude reflection of a deeper truth. Eve. Writhing is connected. The danger is not the network itself, but the illusion that it replaces relationship. True connection does not travel through cables, but through consciousness. The garden does not need to be built. It needs to be remembered in how we see and how we act. Remembrance begins with reverence. To revere is to see the world as alive again, to touch a leaf as though it breathes, to listen to rain as though it speaks. The ancients called this anamnesis, sacred remembering. It is not nostalgia, but awakening. The restoration of intimacy between creation and consciousness. When you kneel before a tree, you're not worshiping an object, you're greeting kin. Every prayer, every gesture of care is an act of repair, weaving the fabric of paradise thread by thread. Perhaps this is what the story of Adam and Eve always meant. Their task was not to remain innocent, but to become conscious gardeners, to learn through experience what unity truly is. The serpent's gift was not corruption, but potential. Only through knowledge, through the long wanderings of history, could humanity awaken to what innocence could not perceive, love born of awareness. We were never meant to guard the garden, perfected that screen. We have built instruments that can peer across galaxies and split atoms, yet we have forgotten how to look at a single flower without naming it. Science measures petals, counts chromosomes, maps DNA, but the living presence, the miracle of the flower being escapes its grasp. The fall in this sense continues every time we look without wonder. Every act of perception without reverence is another step away from the garden. And yet the same mind that fractured vision can heal it. When awareness becomes still enough, the separation dissolves. The philosopher Martin Buber called this the either relationship, the sacred encounter in which one meets the world not as object but as presence. All real living, he wrote, is meeting. To meet the world again in this way is to reopen Eden's gate. For in that moment, every leaf, every breath, every human face becomes the face of the divine. Mystics have always described the shift as a kind of second sight, seeing through the veil of form to the light that animates it. The Sufis call it baser inner vision. The Christian Desert Fathers theory, physic contemplation of nature as revelation. To them, paradise was not a place but a perception. The state in which everything seen is recognized as sacred. To walk in such vision is to live again in Eden, though the ground beneath your feet be dust. But to return to this seeing, one must unlearn the blindness of possession. The eye trained to consume cannot perceive holiness. We have been conditioned to view the world through layers of ownership, utility, and control. Trees are lumber, rivers are resources. Time is currency. Even beauty we claim as property, photographed, packaged, sold. Yet beauty, when truly seen, cannot be owned. It dissolves the observer, melts boundaries, awakens awe. To reclaim paradise is to let go of control and surrender to communion. A story from the Sufi tradition tells of a seeker who asked his master how to see God. The master handed him a glass of water and said, "Drink until you can taste the rain." Confused, the seeker drank deeply but found only water. Again, said the master, "Drink until you taste where it came from." And at last, when his thirst turned to listening, he wept, for he could taste clouds, wind, and sky. The lesson is simple. The divine is not hidden, it is misperceived. To remember Eden is to taste the origin in everything. Modern neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity of attention, the ability to reshape perception through awareness. Spiritual traditions call it mindfulness, contemplation, prayer. In both cases, the result is the same. The world comes alive again. Studies show that when people practice sustained attention to nature, empathy increases, aggression declines, and the brain's networks of separation quiet. Science is unknowingly proving the mechanics of paradise. When we see through presence rather than projection, harmony restores itself. Perhaps this is why every spiritual practice begins with breath. Breath is the bridge between self and world. The first communion, the first prayer. In Eden, breath was the language of creation. God breathed life into Adam. And that same breath moves through all being still. When we breathe consciously, we remember that we are not separate from the garden's air. Every inhale carries a molecule once breathed by ancient forests, by ancestors, by oceans. Every exhale feeds the world in return. The rhythm of respiration is the rhythm of Eden, the exchange that binds all life in a single pulse. In this light, even suffering changes meaning. Pain, loss, and decay cease to be evidence of exile and become part of the garden cycle of renewal. The dying leaf feeds the root. The broken heart expands the soul. To remember, paradise is not to deny sorrow, but to see it as transformation. The cross and the tree of life are the same symbol turned inside out. Death is doorway, not punishment. The serpent's shedding, the seed's burial, the sunset's fire, all whisper the same truth. Nothing real is ever lost, only changed. Only this understanding is not new. It is the oldest knowing reborn. Indigenous cultures have carried it quietly through the ages, living in relationship with land and spirit. To them, paradise was never something to be regained because it was never left. Their prayers were not to a distant deity, but to the living earth, the ancestors, the sky. They remembered what the rest of the world forgot. That creation is conversation. When we speak, the world answers. When we listen, the world sings. It is possible that humanity's return to the garden will not come through revelation, but through remembering these old ways of seeing, ways that modern thought once dismissed as superstition, but which were in truth languages of relationship. To restore the sacred is to restore participation, to know again that consciousness does not end at the skin. Every act of attention is creative. Every act of care weaves the world. And perhaps this is what the myth of the new heaven and new earth truly means. Not a new cosmos, but a new way of seeing this one. Heaven does not descend from above. It unfolds from within awareness. When perception is purified by love, every moment becomes lit from inside. The ordinary glows, the sacred hums in dust and laughter alike. We do not need to escape the world to find Eden. We need only awaken to it. The gates were never locked. They were mirrored. The cherubim stand not in the east, but in the eyes. When vision clears, the sword of flame becomes light, and the world reveals itself as what it has always been. The living heart of the divine. And maybe one day, when enough of us learn to see again, to look without wanting, to listen without grasping, The veil will lift completely. The rivers will shine as they did at the beginning. The trees will stand as teachers, and time itself will bend into stillness. Then at last, humanity will walk again in the cool of the evening, not as strangers in creation, but as its remembering. When humanity finally begins to see the world as alive again, something subtle yet immense begins to shift. The weight of centuries starts to lift. The fear that once drove us to conquer becomes reverence. The hunger to possess becomes gratitude. This perhaps is how the garden returns, not in thunder or fire, but in quiet gestures of remembrance. A hand planting a seed, a voice forgiving another, a breath taken in awareness. Paradise does not arrive as miracle, it awakens as practice. In the ancient language of the heart, every act of care was a prayer. To till the soil was to touch the skin of the earth, to draw water was to honor its spirit. The earliest rituals were not sacrifices of fear, but celebrations of participation, the joy of living within a living world. But over time, reverence hardened into religion and ritual became repetition. The living current turned to stone. The modern age inherited that rigidity. It built cathedrals of intellect and industry while the rivers outside ran dry. And yet, beneath the concrete, the old pulse still moves. It waits patient for us to remember. We are beginning to remember. All over the planet, small circles form. People gathering to plant trees, clean rivers, meditate, sing. They call it restoration, conservation, healing. But in truth, these are ceremonies of remembrance. Without knowing it, they're reenacting the oldest story. Humanity tending the garden once more. The work of our time may not be invention, but reconnection. To mend the invisible threads that bind consciousness to creation. Perhaps that is why so many feel a quiet yearning they cannot name. We call it climate grief, ecological anxiety, existential dread. But beneath those names lies something older, the memory of a broken covenant. We ache not because the world is dying, but because a part of us knows it was once whole. The grief itself is sacred. It is the pain of awakening, the sign that the heart is still boo. ND to the garden. In that sorrow lives a doorway. For when we grieve with awareness, we are already halfway home. Indigenous elders say that the world does not need saving, it needs witnessing. When we truly see the earth suffering without turning away or numbing, our perception shifts from separation to participation. The rivers cease to be resources and become relatives again. The mountains cease to be obstacles and become elders. It is only through love, not guilt, that paradise returns. For guilt binds us to the past, but love draws us toward renewal. Science, once seen as the slayer of the sacred, has begun to circle back toward awe. Ecologists speak of biophilia, the innate love of life embedded in human DNA. Quantum physicists describe a universe of entanglement where every particle echoes every other. Neuroscientists study compassion and discover that it heals both the giver and the receiver. Slowly, a pattern emerges. The structure of reality is relationship. In that realization, myth and mathematics converge. The story of Eden is written into the equations of the cosmos. But if the structure of the world is relationship, then its healing must come through relationship as well. The restoration of paradise will not arrive through machines or miracles, but through connection between humans, between species, between worlds seen and unseen. When we listen to the silence between words, to the space between breaths, we find that every form of life is speaking. The trees with their slow language of carbon and root, the mycelium weaving communication beneath our feet, the wind shifting as if in response to thought. The more we listen, the more the world reveals itself as conscious. The veil thins, not through revelation, but through relationship. The ancients understood this language instinctively. The Celts called it animara, soul friendship, the bond between beings beyond form. The Chinese spoke of Tao, the invisible harmony that moves through all. The Sumerians called it Emi, the laws of balance descending from the deep. Every culture at its root held the same knowledge that to live rightly was to move in rhythm with the living order. To fall out of rhythm was to fall from paradise. We live in an age of noise, but the rhythm has never stopped. It is the same pulse that beats in the chest, that hums in the ocean, that vibrates in atoms. The spiritual traditions called it logos, word, breath life. Science calls it frequency. The name does not matter. What matters is remembrance, that the garden's music still plays, waiting for us to listen again. When enough of us begin to move to that rhythm, the change will not be gradual. It will be exponential. Consciousness will reach a critical mass of coherence, and the world will shift as if by grace. The prophets called it the 1,000 years of peace, the new earth, the return of the golden age. but it will not arrive as external salvation. It will unfold from within like spring returning to soil that was always alive. The rivers will flow clearer because our minds will. The sky will brighten because our hearts have. The earth mirrors us because we are its awareness in human form. This is not wishful thinking. It is the physics of the soul. When a tuning fork vibrates, nearby strings begin to resonate. One coherent heart can bring harmony to a room. 1,000 can shift a city. 1,000,000 can realign a world. The restoration of paradise does not depend on power, but on presence. Each moment of compassion, each breath of gratitude, each act of listening is a note in the song of return. And so the work of remembrance is quiet, almost invisible. It happens not in grand revolutions, but in how we tend the small, how we speak, how we rest, how we walk upon the earth. The garden grows in gestures, each one an answer to the ancient question. What happened to Eden after the fall? It became us. It became this fragile, luminous world that still trembles with the possibility of grace, perhaps the gray. Saddest revelation of all is that the divine never abandoned creation. It disguised itself as matter, hid within the smallest cells, the humblest lives waiting to be seen. Every act of awareness uncovers another corner of the garden. Every moment of kindness clears a patch of soil, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the light returns to the world, one human heart at a time. When the last barrier of separation dissolves between self and other, human and earth, sacred and ordinary, there will be no need to seek Eden. The world will shine with its own original face, and will know that the journey through exile was never punishment, but pilgrimage. The garden did not vanish. It became the path itself. And when we walk that path with open eyes and open hands, paradise will bloom again, not as memory or myth, but as the living truth of this moment. For the gates of Eden are not beyond the horizon. They are the space between two breaths, opening and closing eternally in the rhythm of creation itself. If paradise now awakens within the human heart, then the story of the fall begins to change meaning entirely. It was never about disobedience, never about punishment. It was about descent, spirit entering matter, light learning to bear its own shadow. The myth becomes less a tragedy than an initiation, a rite through which the infinite becomes intimate, and the divine remembers itself through human eyes. To fall was to enter time, to walk among seasons, to feel the slow rhythm of growth and decay. Only through that journey could eternity come to know compassion. Seen in this way, the exile was never expulsion. It was experience. In Eden, innocence was effortless because there was no choice. But innocence without awareness is only sleep. To awaken consciousness needed contrast, the knowledge of good and evil, of joy and sorrow, of life and death. The fruit was not forbidden, it was necessary. And the serpent, far from deceiver, was the messenger of transformation, the force that drives creation towards self-recognition. For every paradise must fall to realize what paradise means. This idea would have scandalized the theologians of empire who needed sin to justify control. Yet long before dogma, the earliest mystics already understood the paradox. In the Gospel of Philip found among the Gnostic scrolls of Nag Hammadi, it is written, "You say the flesh is a tomb, I say it is a temple." The same clay that binds us to earth also binds us to divinity. Humanity's descent into the physical was not corruption. It was incarnation. The divine wanted to know itself from within the world it had imagined. We are that knowing embodied. If so, then Eden after the fall is not a lost homeland, but the world as it is, still sacred, still alive, but waiting for recognition. Every act of creation, from the birth of a child to the shaping of words, is an echo of the original breath that formed the garden. Even the ache of longing that haunts us is holy. It is the memory of unity calling us home. We do not need to destroy the world to find paradise again. We need only see it with new eyes, purified by the long pilgrimage of forgetfulness. But this seeing cannot remain personal. The age of solitary enlightenment is ending. In the ancient cycles of time, humanity was divided so that consciousness could explore its possibilities. Now the pendulum swings back toward unity. The next Eden will not be a return to simplicity, but the integration of complexity, the many rediscovering the one. We will remember not as individuals escaping the world, but as a species awakening within it. The prophets glimpsed this in visions of the new earth where the lion lies down with the lamb. To them it seemed miraculous. To us it will feel natural. Harmony was never supernatural. It was simply forgotten. Already we see the beginnings of this new remembrance. Movements that seek not dominance, but dialogue between cultures, between faiths, between human and non-human. The resurgence of ancien, ecological wisdom, the blending of science and spirituality. the return of the sacred feminine. All these are not trends, but symptoms of evolution. Consciousness, like a river long buried, is surfacing again. The current that once flowed through the garden is rising through humanity itself. And yet, the resistance grows stronger too. Every threshold bears its guardians. The forces of fear, greed, and division tighten their grip, mistaking the end of control for the end of the world. But they too serve the pattern. The darkness always intensifies before the dawn, not as punishment, but as purification. Shadows expand when light returns. Even chaos has its place in the order of remembering. It is tempting to think of the new Eden as an arrival, a final piece. But paradise, in truth, is not a destination. It is a dynamic balance. It breathes. It grows. It requires tending as the first garden did. Harmony is not maintained through perfection, but through attention. To live in Eden is to live awake, to feel the pulse of life in all things, and to respond in kind. The task of the future is not to create paradise, but to maintain awareness of it. For if the fall was forgetting, then vigilance is remembrance. Every moment is a choice between exile and return. When we speak with love instead of fear, we step back into the garden. When we forgive, the flaming sword dims. When we listen, the river's clear. When we rest in gratitude, the fruit ripens again. Each small act of consciousness repairs the fabric of creation. The myth lives not in the past, but in our daily breath. And perhaps in this rhythm of remembering, something vast stirs beyond us. The earth is not merely awakening, it is participating in a greater cosmic cycle. The same way a cell awakens within a body, humanity may be awakening within the consciousness of the planet itself. The mystics of old intuited this, that Gaia is not metaphor but being, and that her remembering mirrors our own. When enough of her cells, her people become aware of the whole, the planet will shift its vibration. The new heaven and new earth may not mean destruction, but integration. The merging of spirit and matter, heaven and world, into a single continuum of life. If this sounds mystical, remember that every transformation in history once sounded impossible. There was a time when the idea of flight, of communication across oceans, of understanding the stars, seemed divine fantasy. Yet each became reality the moment humanity remembered a hidden law of nature. The same will be true of consciousness. When we finally understand that awareness itself is the ground of being, not a byproduct of it, the separation between creator and creation will dissolve. The garden will not be restored, it will be realized. In that realization, even the meaning of death will change. The fall taught us to fear endings, but in truth, every death is a doorway. The leaves that fall each autumn do not mourn their passing, they become the soil for new growth. So too, civilizations end so that consciousness can flower in new form. The ruins of the past are not failures, they're compost for the future. The garden is eternal because it knows how to die beautifully. When humanity learns this again, peace will not need to be imposed. It will arise like spring. The violence of survival will yield to the grace of participation. Art will replace conquest as the measure of greatness, and wisdom will replace knowledge as the measure of progress. We will once more walk in the cool of the evening, aware of the miracle that we are both the gardeners and the garden. And then perhaps the story will no longer be called the fall. It will be remembered as the descent, the necessary passage through shadow into understanding. The serpent, once cursed, will be honored as the first teacher. The tree once forbidden as the symbol of wholeness. And the voice that once thundered from heaven will be heard within, gentle as breath, saying, not return, but rem. Remember, for paradise was never somewhere we left. It was something we forgot how to be. As the memory of paradise flickers awake, humanity stands at a threshold unlike any before. It is not merely historical, it is existential. We are no longer wandering tribes beneath the stars, nor isolated civilizations bound by myth. For the first time, the entire species can see itself reflected in a single image of Earth, suspended in darkness. That fragile blue sphere captured by astronauts half a century ago may be the most profound revelation of our time. It is not just a planet, it is Eden seen from the outside. That photograph called Earthrise did what no sermon or scripture could. It made us remember against the void, Earth shone not as territory or nation, but as living wholeness. Oceans swirled like breath, clouds drifted like thoughts, continents flowed like veins. For a moment, humanity glimpsed the garden entire, and something ancient stirred, a recognition as old as the first sunrise. This is what we'd been missing. Not God above, but divinity among. The sacred does not dwell beyond the world. It is the world waiting for our eyes to adjust. That vision still lingers in our collective soul. It is why environmental movements rise, why compassion spreads through unexpected channels, why millions seek meaning beyond consumption. The image of the whole has reawakened the instinct of the garden, yet the struggle continues, for remembrance alone is not enough. To see paradise is one thing, to live as if it is real is another. The old patterns, the hunger for dominance, the addiction to division, still haunt us like ghosts of a vanished age. They whisper that wholeness is naive, that power is safer than love. But even those voices are fading like the last echoes of a dream at dawn. The next Eden will not be inherited. It must be chosen. Consciousness itself must decide whether it will continue to create through fear or through reverence. In this, the myth becomes literal. The flaming sword still turns, but now it moves within the human mind, cutting through illusion, testing intention. Each thought, each action is a gate. We either step through in harmony or remain in exile. The decision is not collective yet. It begins in the quiet of each heart. And yet there is hope, because the pattern of creation favors awakening. Even chaos serves the restoration of order. The physicists call it entropy, the tendency of life to resist decay by generating higher coherence. The mystics call it grace. The poets call it love. Whatever the name, it moves invisibly through the world, drawing scattered fragments toward unity. It is the same current that shaped galaxies, the same rhythm that guided rivers, the same pulse that made the first garden bloom. And now it rises again through us. In countless small ways, the garden is returning. It grows in community gardens, sprouting between concrete towers, in the gentle hands of healers and teachers, in the quiet courage of those who forgive. It shimmers in the arts, in music that dissolves barriers, in stories that remind us we belong to something larger than our names. The garden does not arrive in grandeur. It blooms in the unnoticed. For paradise has always favored humility. It reveals itself to those who look softly. The ancients spoke of an age when humanity would once more walk with the divine, not as subjects, but as companions. The Sumerians called it Melam, the radiance of gods returning to earth. The Egyptians called it Zeptepi, the first time renewed. The Christians named it the kingdom within, while the Buddhists called it Shambhala, the world made awake. Each prophecy points to the same moment when the inner light and the outer world meet again in harmony. It is not a future promise, it is a memory unfolding. We can already feel it in moments of inexplicable peace. The silence that descends when the mind surrenders, the shimmer that fills the heart when we help another, the quiet ore before dawn. In those moments, the boundaries dissolve and the air itself feels luminous. This is the frequency of Eden returning, not from the sky, but from the depth of consciousness. Every time love outweighs fear, the gates open a little wider. But awakening is not a single event. It is a continuum. The human story is the story of God learning to see through matter, of light, learning to dance through form. Each generation remembers a little more. The cave paintings became temples. The temples became words. The words became silence. And now silence begins to sing again. Perhaps the arc of history bends not toward justice, as some have said, but toward remembrance. Even so, remembrance demands courage. To live as if paradise is real is to act without guarantee, to love in a world that still forgets. It is to trust the unseen rhythm beneath chaos, to tend the small when the vast feels overwhelming. It is not escape from the world, but deeper participation in it. The mystics never fled reality. They became its eyes. And now the call extends to all of us to become the awareness through which the garden sees itself again. Maybe this is the secret meaning of the final chapters of Revelation. The city descending from heaven, radiant with light. The New Jerusalem may not be architecture, but consciousness. The uniting of divine order with earthly form, a city where matter itself glows with awareness, where every wall is transparent, every gate open, every river alive. The old Eden was innocence. The new one will be wisdom, innocence remembered, tested, and redeemed. And perhaps that city is already being built, not in stone, but in soul. Every act of understanding lays a foundation. Every gesture of kindness adds a brick of light. Across the world, unseen, this invisible architecture grows. One day it will be visible, not because it descends from the sky, but because our vision has risen to meet it. The prophets might call this the end of history, but it is really the beginning of participation. The human being, once the exile, becomes the co-creator. The divine no longer hides behind mystery. It breathes through relationship. The garden becomes not an artifact of the past, but the living ecology of awareness. Perhaps this is what all myths were trying to tell us. That the divine dreamt of being known and that dream took form as us. To fall was to forget the dream. To awaken is to remember that we're both the dreamer and the dream. In that realization, the distance collapses. The serpent and the angel, the dust and the light, the beginning and the end, all merge into one unbroken song. And when the last echoes of separation fade, when the veil between heaven and earth becomes transparent, perhaps there will be no more need for stories at all. For then the storyteller and the tale will be one, and the question that began everything. What happened to Eden after the fall will dissolve into an answer too vast for words. Nothing was lost. It only changed form. It became the world waiting to be remembered. In the quiet that follows remembrance, a different kind of knowing begins to settle, the kind that no longer seeks to explain but to inhabit. The garden is not something to be found, for it's never missing. It is something to be lived. It begins in the smallest gestures, in how we touch the earth, how we speak, how we listen. When the human being acts from awareness instead of fear, paradise moves through them like breath through leaves. The divine ceases to be an abstraction. It becomes a daily intimacy. Perhaps this was always the hidden purpose of creation, to teach the infinite how to love the finite. For love, unlike power, requires limitation. To love something is to risk loss. To care for the fragile is to feel the ache of impermanence. Only in a world of time can eternity learn tenderness. The gods may have known glory, but only humanity can know compassion. That too is part of the garden's design. The fall was not exile, it was empa, thy incarnate. Through it, the divine learned how to feel. When mystics throughout the ages spoke of union with God, they did not mean escape from the world. They meant awakening within it. To merge with the divine is not to dissolve into light, but to see the light shining through all things. The monk tending his garden, the mother nursing her child, the scientist tracing the pattern of stars, all are participating in the same act of remembrance. The sacred has never been absent from the world. It has only been waiting for us to recognize it in our ordinary lives. But this recognition demands humility. The mind that seeks to own truth cannot see it. Knowledge must yield to wonder, certainty to curiosity. The mystics called this unknowing, the luminous ignorance that allows revelation. To know God, wrote the 14th century author of The Cloud of Unknowing, is to know that you do not know. In that surrender, something vast enters. When the mind ceases its grasping, the world begins to speak again, and its language is beauty. Beauty has always been the signature of the garden. It is not utility, not even perfection. It is harmony made visible. In beauty, opposites reconcile. Light and shadow, order and chaos, sound and silence. To experience beauty is to experience unity, even if only for a heartbeat. That is why the soul longs for it. Natural state of being. That gratitude, paradise expands not as myth, but as the living awareness of interconnection. Each breath becomes a blessing, each encounter a revelation. And maybe this at last is what the serpent knew, that the knowledge of good and evil was never meant to divide, but to deepen. Only by knowing darkness could we understand light. Only by falling could we learn to rise with love. The fruit was not poison, it was perspective. Through it, humanity became the bridge between heaven and earth, the mirror in which the divine sees itself as whole. So what happened to Eden after the fall? It did not vanish, it transformed. It became the cosmos, the living field of consciousness learning to see itself through form. Every star, every cell, every human heart is part of that unfolding remembrance. And now, after millennia of wandering through our own shadows, we are beginning to glimpse the pattern again. The rivers of the garden flow through our veins, its trees breathe through our lungs, its light burns quietly behind our eyes. Eden was never lost. It became the world. And the world, despite its sorrow, has never stopped reaching back. All it has ever asked is that we remember. There comes a point in every story when words fall away, when what remains is silence, the kind that feels not empty but full. Perhaps that is where the story of Eden ends, or rather where it begins again. After all the searching, after all the exile and the return, what is left is not explanation but awareness. The garden was never somewhere to arrive. It was always the space in which we were standing, waiting to be seen for what it is. The prophets called this moment the restoration of all things. The mystics called it union. But the experience is simpler than either word. It is the stillness of belonging. There is no gate to cross, no angel to appease, no serpent to fear. The garden has grown through us and around us until the line between spirit and matter dissolves. What once seemed distant is intimate. What once was myth is memory. We do not enter paradise. It reveals itself as the ground beneath our every step. It begins subtly. The world softens. The wind feels alive, as if carrying a thought. Light bends differently on the horizon. The faces of strangers glow faintly with recognition. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. This is what the ancients meant when they said the veil would lift. The lifting is not cosmic. It is perceptual. When we stop dividing the world into sacred and profane, heaven and earth merge naturally like the meeting of sea and shore. To live in such awareness is to rediscover innocence. But this time, an innocence informed by experience. It is not the untested purity of the beginning, but the conscious wholeness of return. In Eden, humanity was unaware of its unity with creation. After the fall, we became painfully aware of our separation. But now, through remembrance, we reach the third stage awareness without division. This is what wisdom truly means, not knowing about the divine, but knowing with it. Perhaps this was the purpose of the entire journey, to move from unconscious unity to conscious unity. The divine dreamed of itself as many so that it might know the joy of recognition. Every sorrow, every birth, every loss, every miracle, each was part of the remembering. When we see that, the entire sweep of history rearranges itself. The wars, the empires, the discoveries, the dreams, they were all chapters in the same story. Consciousness returning to coherence. The fall was simply the inhale, the return, the exhale. And so the garden breathes again. It is not confined to a time before or a heaven after. It unfolds in the present, endlessly renewed. The rivers that once flowed through paradise still run beneath our feet, now carrying cities instead of trees. The fruits of knowledge still hang from every branch of our experience, waiting for us to taste them without fear. The serpent S, till coils through the roots of wisdom, not as tempter, but as teacher. Its movement reminds us that every descent can be an ascent when seen from wholeness. Even science in its own language begins to describe what the mystics always knew. The universe is not a collection of things, it is a communion of processes. Energy does not disappear, it transforms. Information is never lost, it evolves. Life itself tends toward complexity, toward consciousness, toward meaning. The cosmos is not running down, it is waking up. Each human heart is a neuron in that vast mind. Each act of awareness a spark in the neural web of creation. When we remember, the universe remembers through us. And maybe that is why, even now, amidst the noise of progress and the ache of the world, people feel a quiet certainty that something sacred is unfolding. The crises that shake us are contractions before birth, the final tension before renewal. The earth does not end. It transitions. We are not witnesses to collapse, but participants in transformation. The same pattern that guided galaxies is guiding us. Disintegration, integration, awakening. When that awakening ripens fully, religion will no longer divide and science will no longer explain away. Both will bow before wonder. The sacred and the secular will speak in the same voice, for they were never enemies. Only two ways of looking at the same light. Art will become prayer again, and prayer will become creation. Humanity will cease to ask for salvation because it will understand that it was never lost. The divine will cease to be worshipped as other because it will be felt as everything. Perhaps in that time, storytelling itself will change. Myths will no longer warn of exile, but celebrate relationship. Children will learn that Eden is not long ago or far away. But here, in the rhythm of breath, in the kindness of hands, in the silence between words, they will not fear the serpent, nor flee the tree, nor imagine a God of judgment above them. They will live within the garden, not as guests, but as its consciousness, aware, gentle, luminous. And yet, even that vision is only the next turn of the spiral, for creation is infinite and remembering has no end. When the garden is fully known, perhaps it too will fall, not in loss, but in expansion, so that the divine may learn to love again in another form. The story of Eden is not linear, it is cyclical. It will unfold again and again across worlds and ages, each time deeper, wiser, more tender. Paradise, like love, must continually renew itself. In the end, the question, what happened to Eden after the fall, becomes almost unnecessary. The answer is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It is in the wind moving through the grass, in the stars turning above the night, in the pulse beneath your skin. Eden did not end. It became the world's heartbeat. And each of us carries its rhythm, waiting for the moment we pause long enough to feel it again. Perhaps that is how the story concludes. With no final revelation, no thunder, no voice from the clouds, only stillness, the soft rustle of leaves, the sound of breath in the dusk. And in that quiet, The realization gentle, inevitable, that we have been home all along. The garden is not past nor future. It is this, the living now, the unbroken whole, the eternal return of awareness into itself. The fool was only forgetting and remembering, as it turns out, is the real paradise.